So Jeff, when you're ready.
He's definitely got a plethora of knowledge.
And that services. Now, she worked in that homeless program for like 10 years and now she.
This is the actual ad.
Oh, for sure. At 7:28.
Sure, I got
I thought they said 5 minutes. So good. It's not even in. Okay.
I'd like to call to order the special study session of September 3rd, 2024 at 7:28 PM. And we will start with the Public Works Operation Facility, the funding discussion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Cole. I'll turn this over to Chief Financial Officer Raymond, who will introduce our guest and this presentation.
Thank you very much. This is exciting. This is a project we have been talking about for years. And so I'm excited to bring this forward to you this evening. As construction continues on the early phases of the Public Works Operations Facility, staff continues to work on finalizing a phase 3 design and publish a request for bids that is expected to happen pretty quickly in September of 2024. So we should be seeing that bid out on the street within the next coming weeks. Phase 1 of that project has just reached substantial completion. That is the demolition and preload of the site. That's the earthwork. That was budgeted at $3.4 million and was funded by a bond anticipation note, which council authorized. That note was issued in November 2023. And as I mentioned, we just reached substantial completion on that phase of the project last week. Phase 2 is the north parcel improvements, including in the decant facility. That was budgeted at $4.4 million. The decant facility portion of that is primarily funded by a Public Works Trust Fund loan, with the bond anticipation note also funding part of the frontage and the other site improvements that weren't related specifically to the decant facility. And so what we're here tonight to talk about is phase 3. This is the main operations center facility. This is coming in. We are estimating a cost of roughly $51 million for this phase. We've talked about this on many occasions before, but just as a reminder, those costs are allocated about 49% to the general fund and 51% to the utility funds, or water, sewer, and stormwater. That construction, again, is anticipated to be bid in September 2024, with construction hopefully beginning in spring of 2025. So as we approach that final design and bid, staff continues to develop that funding recommendation for phase 3. In February of 2021, just as a reminder, City Council approved resolution number 1573. This was signifying the intent of council to reserve $10 million from the proceeds of the sale of the Sumner Meadows Golf Course and allocate that to the Public Works Operations Facility. As we've spoken on several occasions since that time, staff is noting that additional funding from those sale proceeds would be needed to fully fund the general fund portion of this project. That staff recommendation to access those proceeds to fund the general fund portion of the operations facility really maximizes our city's resources in a couple of different ways. It utilizes one-time revenues to offset one-time expenditures. It also utilizes the proceeds from a surplus general fund asset to construct another much-needed general fund asset for that portion. And it minimizes the burden of debt service on the general fund. Concurrently, for the utility portion, staff will be recommending issuing long-term debt to fund the utility portion of the project. We are pleased tonight to have Mr. David Trageser. He's the Managing Director of D.A. Davidson & Company. We've worked with Mr. Trageser for many years on many different projects. And he will provide a presentation on the financing process, and then staff will be available to answer any questions. Mr. Trageser?
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and Council. Pleasure to be here again. I am Dave Trageser with the sale office of D.A. Davidson. And as Sandra mentioned, I've got a little presentation it's been in your packet. I'd like to run through that. It'll be kind of like a bond 101, introduction to bonds, and also talk about this project in particular. I've had the pleasure of working with the city for about 14 years on a variety of different projects, one of which Cassandra mentioned was the interim financing for phase 1 that we closed a while ago. Prior to that, we did the financing for the building in the cemetery recently. So, without further ado. Some nighttime reading here, just to resume myself. My colleague and I, we do most of the work in Pierce County for most of the cities and many of the other municipalities. Just as a little reference, we're really pleased to be helping the Pierce County Library for your new Sumner Library that is planned. And they'll be issuing bonds for that project later in December. So things are really moving along with that project, which is really cool. Just same group of folks that have worked with the city for many years. Myself, Jim Nelson, we specialize in working with cities. We have experts in quantitative analysis, rating, which I'll talk about in a few minutes for this project, and research. We also are a leader in distributing bonds in the marketplace. And our focus really is Pierce County. I'm a Puyallup guy, born and raised, and I remember working out here in the Knutson Bull Farms years ago. So this is a lot of fun to be back here at the city. D.A. Davidson, if you're not familiar, is a regional firm. We're based in beautiful Great Falls, Montana. We're privately held and have a strong commitment locally and nationally for fixed income, and working with municipalities is our specialty. Okay, why would you consider issuing debt for the project? Cassandra mentioned some of those earlier, bridging the gap between available cash that you have and the total cost, spreading that cost over time to match the useful life of the project. These are long-term projects that are going to benefit many people in the future. And additionally, you're locking in current construction costs versus future construction costs, which are unknown. And you can leverage other monies that you have available, whether they're proceeds from the golf course or any other dollars you may have for the project. Bond rating. The city has not been a big issuer of debt. In fact, in 2019, S&P withdrew their fine AA+ rating of the city just because you paid off all your bonds. But you are an excellent credit in the bond market, and that matters because when we go to issue bonds for this project, they're going to be long-term fixed rate bonds. And once you have a credit rating from an independent third party like Standard & Poor's and Moody's Investor Service, that helps you get the lowest borrowing cost in the market. Those bonds can be priced and sold across the country at low tax exempt interest rates. And these are tax exempt because this is a governmental project. We call it a vanilla project, governmental, so that you'll be able to get long-term fixed tax exempt rates. On the right, you can see just the rating categories from Moody's and S&P. As I mentioned, you were AA+, which is the category right next to AAA, the highest available. So we'd be going back to the rating analysts for review of your credit for both general obligation and utility revenue bonds. We'll be working with finance staff to develop a financing plan over the number of months here. Once the bids are in, we'll be looking, as I mentioned, on the credit side, the bond rating side. We have a group of people that will be gathering information for disclosure related to this project. We recommend different structuring options to consider as you go forward. Are we going to look at 15, 20, 25, or 30-year financing for the project? And we build in your capital planning that's already been done on the project. I mentioned the credit being such an important part of long-term borrowing. What's here, and there's a lot of numbers on this page, I'm not going to hit them. I'll just hit a couple highlights and say the city is noted here in the middle. You do not have outstanding ratings because you paid off all your debt. We put some comparable other cities on the left and right, AA rated cities on the left, some AA+ rated cities on the right. That's the next step higher. And cities are measured by their finances, the tax base, and demographics. A lot of these credit factors are outside your control. For example, the demographics, how quote rich your city is. If you look at in your particular case, under median family income, the last bullet on the bottom, you're at 115%, which above the median nationally, which is a good number. That has been built into your prior ratings. Other good things, your tax base, you'll notice the taxable AV of 5.3 billion, which is a very solid number. Your assessed value per capita right below that of 498,000, which is a very strong number. Those are good. And the general fund, we look at, the general fund balance as a percentage of revenues. Those have been very strong. So you have a lot of liquidity in the city and fund balance. I know you'll be spending different portions of that going forward. But those are good benchmarks that bode well for when we go back to a rating agency to ask for their credit opinion. Non-voted bonds that can be issued by the council. And these really in two buckets. One is what we call limited tenor general obligation bonds. They're also known as councilmanic bonds. You have the ability to issue those bonds up to 1.5% of your assessed valuation. And then you can pledge anything within the general fund or other sources to pay them back. I just listed them there. Cassandra also mentioned, because this is a 49% general fund, 51% utilities, the expectation that you'd be issuing long-term revenue bonds supported by the water and sewer utilities. This is a common form of non-voted bonds. You pledge to pay those back from what we call a net revenue pledge of the water sewer combined utility. And the important part there is we look at what we call your debt service coverage. How much cash flow does the combined utility spin off to pay its operation and maintenance and then pay its debt service? Typically, we like to see a 2 times coverage charge. We'll be looking at that. The city can also issue other interim financing for projects like we did with the bond anticipation note earlier for phase 1. You can issue up to 3 years of interim notes for projects. On the councilmanic, the limited tax general obligation side, there is a state statutory debt capacity. And what I've done here is just put a hypothetical number in there. If you follow this down, it's based on your total assessed valuation. I mentioned that $5.3 billion. And 1.5% of that's 80 million. So just 49% of the total is noted in the footnote there, $51 million project plus paying off the bands that were issued earlier, that's 55 million. If you multiply that times 0.49, you get a number of 27 million. So if you didn't utilize money from the golf course and you just issued $27 million of bonds, you can see you still have significant non-voted general obligation debt capacity available. Those numbers flow into your total general obligation calculation below. Now, I will say that this is just statutory capacity. That's the amount that the state limits you. That doesn't provide the debt service to pay it off. You have to be comfortable with the amount of cash flow you have from sources to pay off either councilmanic bonds or water and sewer bonds, which I'll get to in a minute. There is no statutory capacity calculation for water sewer revenue bonds. We just have to demonstrate that you have the cash flow, that debt service coverage that I mentioned earlier, to pay them off. And that's done, before the bonds are issued. Does that make sense? Okay. Now we get into structuring. I mentioned, similar to a home mortgage, you can look at financing long-term bonds over a variety of terms, 15, 20, you can even go up to state law up to 40 years if you wanted to. Obviously, 15-year, you're paying a lower total interest cost. If you go out on the far side, 30 to 40, you're paying higher total interest, but the actual debt service payment is lower, just like a home mortgage. So we balance all that. And for typical capital construction and bond issues, especially if you see voted bonds in the market for schools and other things, they typically say 20-year maturity for the bonds. But you have the ability to pick and choose with any of those numbers. And we'll be evaluating those numbers with staff as we go forward. Okay, more hypothetical numbers only. I was asked to just put this together. And so what I've done here is just assume that same total cost as noted in the footnote 1. And you did decide to issue councilmanic bonds for the 49% and the water sewer for the 51%, and did not contribute any money from the golf course to mitigate those numbers. This is kind of a worst case number. So what would the actual debt service numbers be on an annual basis and a total debt service over the life? And then what we call a true interest cost. That's similar to like an APR when you get a home mortgage. It's an all-in cost for the bond issue. So as an example, for the water sewer portion, you did 20-year financing little over $2 million debt service, true interest cost of 382. This was the market as of last week for bonds that were rated in the categories that we expect you to be rated. The actual interest rates would not be finalized until bonds are actually priced. And I'll get to that timeline later. So we'd be subject to the bond market at that time, but this is just a snapshot. So you can see as the term extends from 20 to 30 years, the actual average annual payment goes down, which is what you expect. The total debt service over the life, not assume as they run to full maturity and they're not paid off early or refinanced, it would go up, obviously with the longer term. So these numbers are very similar for both the water sewer bonds and the LTGO bonds at the bottom, and the true interest costs are almost identical. And the reason for that is that in the bond market, water sewer bonds and limited tax general obligation bonds trade almost identically because they're all governmental purpose. In fact, some investors prefer water sewer bonds because, they really like the utility. People have to make their utility payments. For limited tax general obligation bonds, they are full faith and credit obligations, but and you're pledging the general fund, which is the highest pledge you can make. But the bond market just seems to like utility revenue bonds just a tiny bit more. There's a few more players in that market. So before I go any further, any questions on any of these numbers or any of the backgrounds that I've given to date?
Looks like there are no questions. Please
Okay.
proceed.
I do have
Oh, I guess there is one.
I was just curious, on the about previous slide, you said there was $3 million in general obligation debt right now, but then earlier you said there wasn't any debt, so we don't have a rating. So what can you explain?
Okay, so the only debt you have outstanding is for the small, I've taken out in this calculation that we're gonna refinance the ban, which is Councilman Bank. But you still have like the cemetery debt and some other debt, but that's not rated. We didn't go to a rating agency for that because it was short term. It didn't make economic sense to go to the rating agency for those smaller obligations because the rating agency is great for bigger financings, longer term financings, but you pay the rating agency a fee for their evaluation. So for the small items that you've done before, there's no rating involved.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, moving on. I was also asked to give you a little bond market update generally. This is just a 20-year history of what we call our bond buyer index, which is a composite of high rate general obligation bonds, just like you. And so it's a 20 years, so you can see the all-time lows there during the pandemic when rates were down at 2% for long-term fixed rate bonds. And what's happened since then with inflation being a specter in our market, interest rates rising. However, if you followed the market within the last 5 months, you've noted that the Federal Reserve is expected to reduce interest rates, short-term interest rates, later this month in February, and probably again in November. In anticipation of that, the market has digested that, and it's hard to see in the far right, but rates have come down some. We're still at an attractive rate over the last 20 years. We break this down into borrowing long-term 20-year at the top, 10-year financing in the middle, and short-term rates at the bottom. Again, this is a 10-year history of those rates. And you can see the pandemic there and how all have risen. The biggest riser and faller has been short-term rates. Because what's happening is that when the Fed ratcheted up short-term rates, that affects long-term rates to some degree, but mostly short-term rates go up. And now that you're seeing them go down the fastest, just as the Fed is reducing short-term taxable rates. The Fed can only control short-term taxable rates, and that has some impact on your long-term tax-exempt borrowing, but not a tremendous amount. City asked me to put together a schedule of events related to this financing. You can see our update today. What will be happening over the next few months, and I'm just going to skip down. If you go down to the bottom there, it says pricing of bonds, March 20th, the second green one from the bottom. So that is the day that we are targeting to actually price bonds, sell bonds in the marketplace, finalize the interest rates, and promised to wire transfer to the city on April 3rd on bond closing, the proceeds from the sale of the bonds. And the city will have the proceeds and will invest those over the construction of the project and then close out the bond issue. Before we get to that point, we got a lot of work to do. Because I mentioned we have to start working on those disclosure information. Bond counsel, who is another player in this, they prepare the disclosure documents and they actually prepare your delegation bond ordinance, which is the only action item needed by the council. That's scheduled to come for your consideration on January 20th. It will be similar to other delegation bond ordinances you have approved, similar to the cemetery or the notes that you issued earlier. Once those are approved, and in those, there'll be certain parameters that will delegate to staff the ability to finalize the transaction and price bonds in March. Those delegation parameters would include maximum par amount, maximum interest rate, maximum term of maturity, those type of things. And then the finance team would have the ability to finalize the issue. We then go through due diligence, continuing disclosure work. I mentioned going back to the rating agency because you are such a great credit and these will be long-term fixed rate bonds and they will be a larger par amount. It will be economically advantageous for you to do so. You will be saving a lot of money by getting that rating because of your expected rating outcome. Then we get to the point where we get the rating back. In this case, it's February 27th. That's the date that we're looking at. We distribute information to investors. We have a little pre-marketing call the day before bonds are priced. And then we work towards a closing on April 3rd when you get your money. There are a lot of players involved in this. Here's the city team that's currently working on it. I mentioned my colleagues that are involved. I mentioned Bond and Disclosure Council at J&L Gates. Because this is a publicly offered bond issue, unlike the $3 million that you've got outstanding, we have a bond registrar fiscal agent. That is US Bank. The state of Washington treasurer has a contract with US Bank that is available to all municipalities in the state. It's very cheap and easy to use. And US Bank keeps track of all of your bondholders and makes payments to them. And so every 6 months, Sandra will be getting a notification about the debt service that's coming due. They have a pivot online system where they make payments to bondholders and they'll be transferred to US Bank, and US Bank will make payments to bondholders going forward every 6 months. I know I've supplied you with a lot of information, but I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have about bonds or our process going forward.
Very interesting. Go ahead.
So I'm just curious, when I see the list of names on the slide before,
Yep.
you know, usually when there's been an ordinance, the mayor's been included. I don't see any elected official or, I mean, is this just normal? I mean, I don't know all the process.
Yeah, well, I'll just say, and then I'll let the city comment about the distribution. Typically, these people are getting every email from starting in day one here, you know, for all these documents.
Yeah.
And we'd be glad to include the mayor if they want to do all that stuff. Otherwise, you know, we're providing updates as we get a little closer going
Yeah.
forward.
So that it's-
Whatever your pleasure is.
No, I mean, that's fine with me. I'm sure she'd kill me. if I had her
I
at
think
it.
we just volunteered her. So this really is the distribution list for kind of the logistical
Oh,
practice of issuing the debt. We still have our own city processes, so we still have regular reports to Finance and Personnel Committee on where we're at with a funding package. We would still have reports to council, similar to what we were doing when we did the private placement issuances with the delegation ordinances for the cemetery building and the anticipated, where we're coming and we're providing a report at the study session. The action that council is taking is the delegation ordinance that will come before you at a study session and then for action at a regular business meeting. But there's still report points at each of those that I'm providing to council, not only through that process, but then directly after that process as to, you know, you issued the delegation ordinance, as Mr. Traeger said, with the parameters, you know, here's your max term, your max interest rate, your max par. And then I come back to you at the next business meeting after that pricing and say, okay, here's where we ended up. Here's what we're looking at as our closing date. At that point, it just becomes housekeeping in finance. We roll the debt service into our budget preparation and it just gets paid out. But we still have, aside from kind of the very regimented issuance process, we still have our city processes as well.
But that, I mean, if that's a distribution, that makes sense. Why what's it included?
Good.
I just have a couple questions. So on the rating, so having no rating, like if you have no credit score, that's generally not good in like from a personal level. So can you explain a little bit, like, what does it mean to have no, I know what it means to have no rating, but like, is that a negative thing? Is it expensive to go get this rating, like more than if we had it already?
So the rating agencies, S&P and Moody's, when we'll make a recommendation as to which one to go to, their rating fees are all very similar. And they do not differentiate on a new issue rating, whether they have an outstanding rating from them or not. So they're not gonna charge you more because you don't have an outstanding rating. And the only reason you don't have a rating is you don't have much debt. And they recognize that, and that's a good thing. You know, that's a credit positive. When they go through the analysis, well, this is the first material debt that the city may have in a number of years. So
The rating is more on the issue, not necessarily the issuer. So because we don't have an outstanding general.
It's not like having no credit score where it hurts you.
right.
Right.
It's actually, okay. And then how would we get a AAA rating? Nobody has that? Is that, it'd be a bigger city?
Oh, no, there are a handful of municipalities that do have a AAA rating. And as I mentioned, some of those things are outside your control, you know, the wealth of the community, Seattle, King County, and there are a few other smaller municipalities that do. And I showed you some of the ones here that are right next to AAA, AA plus. And that's what your prior rating was, which dates about 5 years ago, and your tax base has grown since then, and things have changed since then. So things look probably even more positive. But you are adding some debt, so that's a slight negative. So is a AAA possible? It's possible, not likely, for a smaller mid-sized city, but you've got a lot of credit positives, and because of that high credit rating that we expect, it'll allow you to market your bonds at very low interest rates around the country for this type of issue.
Thank you. Okay, I just had a couple more questions. On the types of terms on a loan, like a lot of loans, like commercial loans have more than just interest rate. They have things like interest only periods or prepayment penalties, or is there anything, other types of terms that are significant in the
Yeah.
issuance of a bond?
So in the muni market, it's typical for long-term fixed rate bonds that you issue with what we call a 10-year no-call provision. So if you're issuing 25-year bonds, you're asking investors to invest for a 25-year period. They're giving you a fixed rate, but they're saying, you know what, for that, we do not want the city to refinance or pay us off prior to 10 years. After 10 years, you can refinance or pay off any portion at any time. That's the benchmark in the muni market. Yeah. And so that's the major other covenant or promise that you'd be making, is that you'd have a 10-year no-call provision. That allows you to get the lowest borrowing cost in the market. We can go out and request a 9-year call provision or an 8-year call provision, but typically that will cost you a little more interest rate in the market, and it's not recommended because most new issue bonds are sold with a 10-year par call provision.
Generally, that call provision is to protect the interest rate for the investor.
Yeah, so they can get that tax exempt rate for at least 10 years.
Okay,
That's
not
why they're
bad.
committing to buy it, for a longer period.
Got it. Okay. And then Cassandra, question for you. I noticed, if you look at the ratings list that you had up on the slide, second slide or third slide, everybody on just the AA number, they had like a pretty low liquidity. It was like in the 40s and 50s. And I think everybody on the right with the AA plus, they had like a lot of them had 120% on the liquidity. And so I think we were on the lowest of all those. So I'm just curious, what is your thought on, like, do you think we should have higher liquidity? Do you think you're pretty happy with where we're at, or?
I think we're pretty happy with where we're at. I would need to go in and take a look at what's comprising those numbers.
Yeah, and remember, a lot of
Yeah.
these numbers are dated from 22 or
Mhm.
21, in the middle of the pandemic, when they got some other, cash and the like, if you know what I mean. So some of those may not be totally representative of post-pandemic world.
Okay, and the interest rates you provided as estimates, those are based on an AA plus or AA?
Okay, so let's go to that page. I footed them in the footnote. So the last footnote assumes the 26, I talked with my underwriter, trader. They assume a AA rating for water sewer revenue bonds and AA plus, which is your old rating for LTGO.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're moving on to item number 2, Community Partners Fund. Council decision.
Deputy Mayor, we'll get my presentation up here, and Mr. Stephens, if you could upgrade me in Zoom, that'd be appreciated. Thank you. Try not to take that too many times for you guys. Okay, so tonight we're here to talk about Community Partners Fund. As a reminder, a couple weeks ago, we had a number of presentations from everybody who applied to be to receive these community partner funds. So tonight we're here to talk about how do we divvy up the $250,000 that the council has in their proposed budget. I just want to take a moment, talk about some historical funding. Traditionally, we have funded Sumner Main Street Association and the Sumner Bonnie Lake Family Center as community partners. We did this for probably the last 20 years before the last budget cycle when we created this community partner fund. And that's when we increased that funding to a $200,000 pool for the 2 years. So this is the second time we've done this, and we are actually recommending as part of the budget that we increase this fund to $250,000 for the 25-26 biennium. So the objectives, we allowed more people to apply for funding and make an ask in order to evaluate overall community needs. We want to make this open to as many groups as possible. That's why we created the fund. We also want to give them an opportunity to get before council and the public to share all the good work that they're already doing in our community. And really, this is a council process from this point forward, and gives you an opportunity to make recommendations and changes based on your council priorities that you've adopted. Before we get into going around the room and talking about how much you'd like to allocate to each one of these great organizations, I just want to hit a couple of highlights here. And I'm just going to start going down in the order here and how we've supported these agencies in the past, because it's not always through the Community Partner Fund. So starting with Generous Influencers, as you might recall, this is to host a number of night markets within the city of Sumner. While we have not supported them financially in the past, they are able to utilize the special event permit code, which allows them to get 50% reduction on special event fees. So we have, for example, if our fees for that special event are $2,000, their special event permit fee becomes $1,000. So it's baked into the formula that we use. Mi Casa Housing, the only time we've ever funded them is through the 23-24 Community Partner Fund. And in the current budget, there is no other support to them. The Puyallup Sumner Chamber of Commerce, we do not give them a cash donation. However, we do pay membership fees. We send our staff to their Leadership Institute, which is about $900 to $1,000 per registrant. We try to send at least 2 people a year. We also heavily participate in a lot of their community events and networking meetings. So that's lunches and wake ups. The Family Resource Center through the school district, We've committed $35,000 for well over 20 years to that organization. Schoolie Foundation is not an organization that we have funded before, and this would be the most appropriate fund to support them through. The food bank, we have not historically helped them until the pandemic. They did receive some ARPA funds, or they actually was CARES funds, so it was even before ARPA. And then we supported them through community partner. Sumner Main Street Association, we've been funding them at $25,000 a year for approximately 15 years. Prior to that, we also provided office space for a great reduction. In fact, it was free office space for a number of years. There's also a lot of other ways that we support Sumner Main Street Association through our hanging baskets, not only the purchase of them, but the labor, special event fee discounts through the code that I mentioned earlier, as well as some direct service contracts we have with them. For example, this year they have a $4,000 services agreement with us to put on the Santa Parade, which then takes that off of our staff plate. They're able to do that for us and probably do it a little bit more efficiently, as well as use it as a way for them to raise some funds because they're able to charge entrance fees where we just didn't have the manpower to do that before. Sundance Circle Hippotherapy, also one that we have not funded in the past, but this would be an appropriate use of those funds. Tacoma Area Literacy Council and United Way, same. And then Vadis, I've heard that a long time ago, the city did fund Vadis, but most recently, in the last at least 10 years, this is the only place that we have funded them, and it is also an appropriate use of these funds. So what we did 2 years ago is we actually went council member to council member and had you kind of indicate where you wanted the funding to go. That helped us quickly identify where there was commonalities and where we had some differences. So sorry with you, Deputy Mayor, I'd like to switch my screen and share that, and we can just start down the list wherever you'd like to choose.
Okay.
So let me,
So I get to start, I'm just gonna start at the top of the list.
can you give me just a moment?
Okay, yes,
It's been a while since I've been in Zoom.
ready to go.
And then I didn't have permission, so just a second. Okay. We have Teams all day. It's just slightly different. All right, Deputy Mayor Cole, you said you wanted to go first.
Yes, I will go first.
Go ahead.
So here is my list, and pretty much I'll just tell you if there's zeros or whatever, so I think you can go down, starting at the
Perfect.
top. 5,000, 15,000, 10,000, 70,000, 0, 50,000, 60,000, 0, 3,000, 7,000, 40,000. I have
Let's see if I got
250.
it right. My question that was. And I
Go
know
there, Jason.
this one was Mikasa was 15. I hit the wrong one.
Jesus, I'm 10 off. Mikasa is 15, yes.
You can check it, so I show you you're a little bit over.
I'm generous. That's what it is.
You know,
And someone else has 262. So Mikasa 10,000?
Mikasa 10,000. Okay, so yeah, I typed it wrong.
Yes, that's what happened.
Chamber,
And chamber, no, let's see. So am I 2,000? Oh, am I 5,000 over now? My math just was not good. So let's go to 35,000 for Vadis. And then I'm done.
who would you like to do next?
Councilmember Elfers, are you ready? Okay.
All right, I have just straight down the list, 7,000, 15,000, 10,000, 70,000, 0, 50,000,
Say 15, I'm sorry.
uh,
Food bank.
50.
50, 60, 0, 3, 5, and 30.
0, 20, 0, 70,
Well, you're going way too fast. 0, 20, 0.
0, 20, 0, 70,
Thank you.
0, 50, 60, 0, 3, 7, 40.
Great.
I need a minute.
Clerk, give them just a sec to catch up.
Feel late, but
That's way too much.
247, that probably. Oh, I know.
$3.
what it is. Hold on.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
$3.
That's why I'm not in finance.
Yeah, you ready?
Sure.
Do I have 0, 12, 20, 70, 0, 50, 50, 0, 3, 5, and 35?
You got 5 more to go.
Come back.
No. 5 to go.
You have 5 to go, Mr. Prairie.
How about Main Street?
Okay, you ready for
Greg.
Councilmember
Rinke.
Rinke?
I'm still trying.
We go to potatoes.
I'll start from the top, I guess, you know, like everybody else. So, 0, 10, 60, and these are thousands, right?
Yeah.
Right. Just so you know, 60, 70, 0, 70, 60, and then I think this was 30, then I'm down to 30 at the bottom. 0, 0, 0, and then 30. I don't know where I'm at.
You're about 50 grand over.
Oh,
sorry.
serious. I've got 3 lists here I'm looking at.
We can go to Councilmember Potato maybe and then come back to.
You ready?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know.
So I'm gonna go.
Yes, we'll come back.
0, then Mikasa 20, Chamber 5, Family Center 70, Schoolie 0, Food Bank 65, Main Street 60, Hippotherapy 5, Literacy Council 3,000, United Way 7,500, and August 10.
10.
By under.
You're under.
You're
I'll
under.
give it, then give the
Which
food
one?
bank 70. That'll be a little.
500, that's it.
Take off 500. 69, 500. On the food bank.
Okay.
Okay, Greg, are you ready?
We're making changes, Councilmember Rinke.
Yeah, I'm gonna make some, but I'm trying to figure out where. I'll say 10 at Mikasa. Where am I at?
Yeah.
Chamber, I'm gonna drop to 40. Then I'm gonna keep 70 at the this like Family Center. And Sumner Main Street Association. I'm gonna drop 60.
You're already at 60. Food bank's at 70 and the
I'll drop the Sumner Main Street. 30.
you're at 250 now.
That's where I'll be.
Okay,
I'll just take a minute here and just for the common.
250.
So majority said majority said 60 for Sumner Main Street. Majority said 50 for the food bank. But it said the literacy council at 3,000. So all over the board, chamber all over the board. School lead, nobody. Honey. Your deputy mayor, I'll turn it back over to you to have some discussion. Looks like everybody's consistent that they want to fund Vadas. Everybody's consistent that they want to fund Mikasa. So maybe we start with those two items.
Okay, so any comments about those two items or really sell your case? So it was Vadis and what was the other?
Mikasa.
And Mikasa.
Do I need to use this thing?
Yes. please.
Okay. So I think, for me, my logic behind Mikasa was all the money goes to housing. So there's no paid employees. It's 100% volunteer. There's 18 families here in Sumner that Mikasa provides stable housing for. They only charge 30% of the income. That goes to the rent. So it's a sliding scale. So, you know, if I'm making $900 a month, they're only getting $300 rent. So this money would offset the insurance, the sewer, the water, the maintenance, all the upkeep of these homes. And when you listen to their what I'm going to call their mission, is to provide a house that, you know, families and kids can come home to, and they don't feel like they're in a low income dwelling. So that is why I wanted to give Mikasa that dollar amount that I have up there. I mean, in the economy right now and the cost of living, that is probably, well, that's not gonna cover it all, you know, just maintenance alone. So that's why I really gave that money to them.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to Mikasa and Vadis? Okay, Councilman McCord.
Yeah, I'd like to add, okay, I'd like to add to the Mikasa one is that I really like the part where they take a derelict, torn down, something that needs to be fixed up and they made it look really nice. So I really like that part also.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I think the fact that they are a totally volunteer run agency and they do provide the housing that, you know, we're always hearing about affordable housing and, you know, the need for more in this area. So I think it's something we should, you know, for $20,000, that's so here. I think to make it happen, I think is important.
So where do we go from here? How do we decide? Oh, okay.
I was just looking at the averages on the items that we didn't have a majority on. I think we do have a majority on several of them that have zeros, like 4 of us have zeros on one of them. And so I think those are easy. I think if you average out the Vadis and the Mikasa and the chamber, I feel like that to me, that looks like a reasonable way to get there. I think that'd just be my thought as a solution. I think that puts Vadis, if averaging out Vadis is 30,000, averaging out United Way is 5,000, averaging out the chamber and Mikasa are both 15, and that leaves us with 2,000 for the generous influencer. So that would be one option to discuss, I guess.
Okay. Anybody feeling positive about
I'll
that?
chime in real quick.
Okay.
I agree. I mean, Mikasa, I think, is good for us to do. And just looking at the numbers, there's a few at 20, a few at 10 and 12 and 15. So I'm happy to meet in the middle somewhere around 15. And then also with Vadis, I'm good on that for bringing it up to, you know, there's 30, 40s, 35. So somewhere in the 30 range, 30 or 40. And I guess we can tweak it, how everybody else feels. Looks like we've all, at least a common ground is that we all wanted to at least put money into those entities, so I'm good with that. We decide.
So using Councilmember Alford's suggestion on averages, if you take the average for Vadas, it's 30,000. For Mikasa, it's 14,500. So just rounding that up to an even 15, that's where it would put you. At least we can always tweak these here, but trying to step through this here. I think the next one that had a lot of support was United Way.
Yes.
So 5250, taking out the 0. That gets you up to 6,300 as your average. Plug that in for now.
Like, I want to
But
speak
you,
to
okay,
it.
and you still have to include the 0 in order to get a true average though.
You're absolutely.
Okay.
This year, the Sonoma Area Literacy Council.
Oh, okay.
It was unanimous. So yes, to get the true average, you gotta include the 0.
So,
Okay.
so the money's used for the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, which provides books to children birth to 5, which is a very critical area. Like the reason why there's a number of agencies that are up there that are helping maybe low income or families that are struggling, getting like with the Literacy Council and United Way, trying to get education from the early years, I think is really important. So that's why I stayed with the 7,500. And I know that in both Sumner and Bonnie Lake, like a year ago is when the program started in Washington State for all kids, that the demand has been great and, it's been well received. So the money would be well used, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you for speaking up for the Literacy Council
Well,
Me-
then,
and
the
the-
United Way.
and the United Way. Anyone else want to talk about those? Oh, comments? No, okay. Thank you, Councilmember Potato. So, so how are we doing with just the average?
So that puts the 5,500 in there, that rounding up from 5,250, similar to what we did for Mikasa. If you look at the average of the chamber, you're at 14,167. Just gonna put some numbers in here, see how close we are. And then 2,000 for that, that actually gets you within $500.
Right there.
Yes.
I think I'm supporting of the United Way, getting that, if there's an extra $500 and it's just a small thing, I think that getting that up to 6,000 would be, I would support that.
That works for me, Councilmember Potato.
So, the reason I didn't support the Schoolie Foundation is, you're mainly providing showers for homeless, and already the YMCA provides that service where, anybody that's homeless in our community or in surrounding areas can go to the Y any day, early in the morning, I think until 8 a.m. So we already have the service, and that's why I didn't support it.
Okay, so now we have just $500 remaining, and it's up to us to decide where to place that $500. Council?
United Way, go
Okay.
to 6,000.
Yes, I'm okay with that. Maybe we just take a vote?
But if everybody's looking like
Well, somebody.
Oh, yeah.
everybody,
Okay, it looks like United Way gets the extra $500.
6,000. Should be at 250.
so the next step, if this is good with council, we'll roll this into the budget. You will still vote on this as part of the overall budget. And we'll highlight this again when we talk about the community partner, and community service funds, which I think is scheduled the first week of No, it's September 30th, actually. Well, September. Okay.
All right, so thank you for that. And let's move on to agenda item number 3, council vacancy. That's yours again.
Yeah. For Mr. Stephens, just a second here. So as you know, Councilmember Brown resigned his seat last week. And thank you, Councilmember Elfers and Bowman, for acknowledging that he was on the council for over 20 years, long time. So we thank him for his service. But what that does is, as you know, that kicks off the appointment process, which is covered in state law. So how we fill this council vacancies is covered by RCW, as well as your council rules, which set forth the process. As a reminder, qualifications, the person appointed must have continuously resided within the Sumner city limits for a minimum of 1 year prior, and also must be a registered voter within the city. This is a little unique because Councilmember Brown is vacating his seat within the first year of his term. That kicks off what we call a short cycle election. The purpose of short cycles is to make sure that we have our council members evenly distributed throughout 2 election cycles. So we're not replacing a full council every 4 years. So whoever's appointed to this position will be on the ballot in 2025. And will have to run for re-election if they want to remain on the council. So the process is we are required to advertise, collect an application, do an interview, appoint, and then swear in. We have 90 days to go through this process. State law says if we don't fill the vacancy within 90 days, that the county council is then required to appoint the position. So as you know, we have a very busy next couple months. We're doing a budget, we're doing a comprehensive plan amendment. We have a lot of big projects that are going out for bid, including an operations center, the White River Phase 2, Stewart Road Bridge. We're very busy right now. But we looked at the calendar and we figured out how we can fit this all in. And if we start advertising September 9th, which is next Monday, we have to keep applications open for 30 days. And then we'll do an interview October 23rd at a special study session, which is a Wednesday. You'll go through the appointment process on the 4th, and we'll swear in a new council member on November 18th. So how we advertise, this is on our website, newspaper of record, which is the Enumclaw Courier-Herald, as well as a posted notice at City Hall. We'll also be putting it in our newsletter, our print newsletter that will be coming out in a couple of weeks, as well as our e-news, and we'll put it on all of our social media. Once again, 30-day application period, they'll be due by 5 p.m. And will include supplemental questions and a resume as required. Endorsements, letters of reference, or other materials will not be accepted. Application and supplemental material will be distributed to the mayor and council and then posted electronically following the PDC rules for disclosure. So the application has supplemental questions. These are the ones we have used in the past. And if council would like to change these, tonight is the night to discuss changing these. It's a 2-page limit. And as you can, the questions are, what is your vision for our city and community? What are the 3 highest priorities and or issues you believe the city needs to address? And how would you propose that the city address those? What strengths would you bring to the council? And number 4, explain your current and past community involvement and or service on city nonprofit or public boards, committees, task forces, commissions, and how has this contributed to the Sumner community? And how is it relevant to your position as a city council member? Interviews are held October 23rd. As I said, that's a Wednesday. It's going to be a special study session. The order is set by random draw, and applicants not being interviewed are going to be asked to leave the room, but not required. The questions will be provided in advance so they can be prepared. And council may limit the response time based on number of applicants. Not in our rules, but historically, council has limited the responses to 5 minutes per applicant, not including any follow-up questions that council may have. The interview questions, there was some confusion earlier this year when we used these interview questions because they're very similar to the written questions and they appeared also on the application. We have removed them from the application to try to make it very clear on what are the interview questions orally and versus the written supplemental questions. However, Looking at these, since they are very similar to the written questions, we looked at our neighboring jurisdictions and some questions that they've been asking when they do this appointment. And I have some proposed questions for you to consider. Number one, why do you want to serve on the city council? Is there something in particular you hope to accomplish while serving on the council? So kind of similar to the written question, just slightly different. Number two, this is about consensus building. So as a council member, you only have the legal authority to cast one of 7 votes. What is your philosophy on how to build consensus on or majority support for a program, policy, or regulation? So how do they work well? How do they work with others? Not only other elected, but also the community. And number 3, is there anything else you'd like to for the council to know before they make their appointment? Any thoughts on these proposed interview questions? You want to change interview questions, we can keep the old ones too. It's up to you.
I like them. I like them too.
Okay. We will get those changed. On November 4th, you'll go through the appointment or nomination process. You can have an optional executive session, both the night of the interviews as well as the night you do your appointment. That is for the purpose of discussing qualifications only. There can't be any straw voting in that executive session. So the call for nominations, council will have the opportunity to nominate one of the applicants. No second is required, but the nomination period must be closed by a motion and a second, followed by a majority vote of council. And then we'll go through a voting process, which will be done by roll call. Appointment does require a majority vote. You can vote multiple times if necessary to obtain that majority. And in the case of a tie, the mayor casts the deciding vote. And once again, you can have that optional executive session, and you may postpone the election to a date certain if a majority vote isn't received, as long as you're mindful also of that 90-day clock that's ticking in the background. And then per your rules, you swear in at the next regular council meeting, which would be November 18th. Questions, discussions, concerns?
Nope.
So
Doesn't look like they're ready.
we will start the advertisement for this on September 9th.
I have one question, just would you mind emailing us? Because there's been a lot of turnover, it's just like how the special like terms and things work. I'd love to see, I'm trying to keep track of, like, you said 1-year term, somebody on the ballot again, there's like a lot of, this is the 3rd time this year. Are you guys, is there like a chart? I'm just trying to keep up with what's happening there.
Yeah, we have it all written down of when their term is, plus the county's notified every single time.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep track of it.
Tracking
If
it.
you have, yeah, I'd love to see that if you wouldn't mind.
So.
Anything else for Jason? Looks like we're good unless you need something else from us.
No,
Okay,
Another hour.
we do have an executive session.
we do.
Very much.
So a city administrator report is on, I'm assuming no. Okay, very good. Any issues, agenda setting issues, any of that to be noted? None whatsoever with council.
Just so you know, Greg will be my substitute
Oh,
for the
on the
finance
finance
committee
person.
Okay.
on the 12th.
Okay, great. Great. Any others? No. Okay, great. So we do have executive session. We're going to adjourn this special study session into executive session at 8:32 p.m. for the purpose of discussing with legal counsel real estate acquisition sale pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101B and threatened litigation per RCW 42.30.110. I don't know that. So we're adjourned. It's an executive session.
15 minutes.